The backstage corridor of the American Virtuoso Prize Awards ceremony was long, like an endless tunnel. Catherine Reed, dressed in a black haute couture evening gown, stood in the waiting area, her fingers unconsciously toying with the metal clasps on her cello case. This instrument had been with her for 10 years, from her days practicing in the dilapidated hall of a community center to her solo performances at Carnegie Hall. Every scratch on the case had been earned through unimaginable effort. From the main hall, the host's excited voice carried, "And now, let's give a warm welcome to the highlight of our evening." Catherine took a deep breath, the tips of her fingers turning cold. She had been waiting for this performance for 3 years. The final solo cello performance at the American Virtuoso Prize was the ultimate coronation for any performer in the world of classical music. For this night, she had turned down all commercial engagements and rehearsed relentlessly for 8 months. The calluses on her fingertips were as hard as shells. "Miss Reed." A staff member with a badge hurried toward her, a strange expression on his face, as if he owed someone $50,000 and couldn't pay it back. "Miss Reed, a situation has come up that we need to discuss with you." "What situation?" "Your right to the final performance. The organizing committee has made a last-minute adjustment." Catherine's fingers froze on the clasp of her case, the edges of her nails turning white. "The adjustment is as follows. Miss Brooke Hayes' sponsor made a substantial last-minute donation for the title sponsorship. The organizing committee, after careful consideration, has decided to give the final performance slot to Miss Hayes. Your performance has been moved to the 3rd spot, and its duration has been shortened from 12 to 7 minutes. The staff member's voice grew quieter and quieter, as Catherine's gaze was too cold. "My right to the final number was bought with sponsorship money?" "Of course not. Miss Reed, your talent is obvious to everyone. It's just that the organizing committee—" "Who signed the order?" The staff member fidgeted, his eyes darting around. Catherine didn't press him further. She turned and walked toward the committee's office. The clatter of her high heels on the marble floor echoed, like nails being hammered into a coffin lid. The door to the committee's office was ajar. The smell of cigars and quiet male laughter drifted out. When Catherine pushed the door open, 3 judges in expensive suits were sitting on a sofa. An open bottle of Louis XIII sat on the coffee table before them. "Miss Reed." The stout man in the middle stood up. A greasy smile plastered on his face. "We were just about to look for you. Who approved the cancellation of my final performance?" Catherine's voice was quiet, but it was enough to make the smiles on the 3 men's faces freeze. "This matter was decided by a collective decision of the organizing committee. Miss Hayes' sponsor, Apex Corporation, added $5 million for the title sponsorship. You know, the American Virtuoso Prize has a limited budget this year. I am asking about the procedure. My place in the finale was approved by a unanimous jury decision last month. To make a last-minute change requires my written consent. Did I sign it?" The 3 men exchanged glances. The smile on the stout man's face vanished completely, replaced by irritation at being caught in a lie. "Miss Reed, you're not a newcomer to our circles. Why make things so complicated? Behind Miss Hayes are the fortunes of both Sterling Holdings and Apex Corporation. This is a favor you'll have to grant, whether you like it or not. Besides, everyone recognizes your talent. Losing one final number won't change anything for you." "Won't change anything?" Catherine's voice suddenly rose half a tone. The words came out like 3 blades. The stout man instinctively recoiled. "This is the most important performance of my career. I spent 8 months preparing a program that you canceled with a single phone call, and you say it won't change anything? Now, why talk like that? We all care about the good of our industry. I will file an appeal. According to Article 17 of the American Virtuoso Prize's bylaws, a participant has the right to appeal sudden changes. The jury is obligated to provide a written response before the performance begins." With that, she turned and left. Behind her, the whispers of the 3 men followed. Catherine didn't look back. Her heart was pounding like someone was beating a drum in her chest. But her back was straight and her stride was confident, like a tightly drawn bowstring. The result of the appeal was brought to her 40 minutes later. A thin sheet of letter-sized paper with the organizing committee's seal. The wording was pompous and hypocritical. Following an emergency review by the jury, and taking into account the overall event program and the interests of our sponsors, the decision has been made to uphold the initial changes. Catherine stared at the sheet for a long time, until the letters began to blur. Her hands were shaking violently, but her face showed no expression. At the end of the hall, she heard familiar footsteps. Custom-made shoes. their heels clicking confidently and rhythmically on the floor. Catherine closed her eyes for a moment. She knew that walk too well. For 3 years of a secret marriage, she had waited for those footsteps on countless nights. When Julian Sterling appeared from around the corner, the buttons on his charcoal gray suit were impeccably fastened. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with features that looked as if they were carved from stone. To outsiders, he was the flawless heir of high society. Handsome, wealthy, unattainable. But Catherine noticed what was in his hands, a unique tiara, studded with small diamonds. It was the exclusive crown, specially commissioned by the sponsor for the performer of the final number. It was supposed to be hers. "Julian," Catherine called out. Her voice was as smooth as still water. "Did you see the result of the appeal?" Julian paused for a moment, then approached with an unperturbed look. He glanced at the paper in Catherine's hands, and his brow relaxed almost imperceptibly. Yes, relaxed. The fleeting expression flashed by like lightning, but Catherine caught it. He had sighed in relief. He had actually sighed in relief. "Catherine," Julian began in a low voice, laced with the instructive tone common to people of high station. "Brooke has been waiting for this chance for years. She has severe depression. Last year, at the Sterling's country home, she tried to slit her wrists. You know that. For you, this performance is just the icing on the cake, but for her, it's a lifeline. Just let her have it." Catherine slowly raised her head, looking at the man she had shared a bed with for 3 years. There was no guilt in his eyes, no sympathy, not even the slightest embarrassment. He was stating a fact that he considered self-evident, as casually as saying the weather is nice today or that there's a board meeting tomorrow. "Do you know how long I prepared for this performance?" Catherine asked. "I know, but you'll have many more opportunities." "No, you don't know," Catherine interrupted. "This is the first time in 30 years that the American Virtuoso Prize has dedicated a separate final number for a solo cello. If I miss this chance, there won't be another one." Julian frowned. It was impatience mixed with a thought of, "Why are you so difficult?" "Catherine, don't make a scene. You saw Brooke's condition. If she doesn't go on stage tonight and something happens, how am I supposed to explain it to her family? You're my wife. You should have a broader perspective." "I should have a broader perspective?" Catherine suddenly chuckled. The smile was brief, like a crack in ice. "Julian, my final number was bought for $5 million, and you're asking me to have a broader perspective? It's just a sponsorship adjustment, not an attack on you." "Then what is that in your hand?" Julian glanced down at the tiara. His Adam's apple bobbed. "Brooke is nervous. She asked me to bring it to her." "This is the first time you've come to one of my performances," Catherine said. Her voice was quiet, like a whisper. "In 3 years of our secret marriage, I've won 6 international awards. You weren't at a single one. You said you were busy, that we couldn't reveal our relationship. I believed you. Today you finally came, not to see me but to bring a tiara to Brooke Hayes." A crack finally appeared on Julian's face, but it vanished instantly, replaced by his usual coldness and control. "You're overthinking it. I came for you. There were just some unforeseen circumstances." "Circumstances?" Catherine stared into his eyes, repeating the word. "The surveillance footage was deleted. Did you know about that?" Julian's pupils contracted. "When I filed the appeal, I requested the camera footage to prove that Brooke Hayes' team had tampered with my music stand while I was waiting. But the organizing committee told me that the cameras were down during that period due to a technical glitch." Catherine's nails dug deep into her palm, a sharp pain shooting through her hand. "And you'll tell me that's also a coincidence?" "Catherine, enough." Julian's tone suddenly turned cold, with an undercurrent of undeniable pressure. "I didn't touch your footage. Don't make assumptions out of a moment of frustration. Go home, I'll deal with tonight's incident." "How will you deal with it? By letting me perform 3rd or 5th next time?" "Can you not be so sarcastic?" Julian scowled. "I already said I'll make it up to you in the future." "Don't bother." Catherine's voice suddenly became calm. This abrupt change made even Julian freeze. She bent down and opened her cello case. Julian thought she was about to take out the instrument. After all, her performance, though shortened, was still on the program. However, Catherine didn't take out the cello. She pulled a document from a hidden pocket in the case. The letterhead read, "The American Virtuoso Prize Organizing Committee. Statement of Voluntary Withdrawal." She took out her fountain pen and, in neat, calligraphic script, wrote her name on the signature line. Each line was drawn as confidently as an inscription on a tombstone. "What are you doing?" A change finally occurred in Julian's voice. It was sudden astonishment. "I'm resigning from the orchestra." Catherine stood up, folded the signed document, and placed it in the hand Julian was using to hold the tiara. The white paper and the diamond-studded tiara next to it looked absurd, like a scene from a dark comedy. "Not third place, not any other place. I am withdrawing from the American Virtuoso Prize and resigning from the orchestra. Since Brooke needs me to give up not only the final number but the entire road, then I'll give it to her. I don't need anything on this path anymore." "You're out of your mind!" Julian abruptly grabbed her wrist, his grip tight enough to feel like it could break her bones. "Do you know what it means to quit the orchestra? Your career?" "My career is completely destroyed." Catherine looked down at his fingers, squeezing her wrist. These long, aristocratic fingers had once gently wiped away her tears on their wedding night. Now, they only brought pain. "That's what you wanted, isn't it? When I have nothing left, I'll sit obediently in the Sterling penthouse like your bird in a cage." "I didn't let go." Julian didn't let go. "I said, let go." Catherine's voice was as cold as ice. She looked up at him. There were no tears in her eyes, no pleading. Only something Julian had never seen before, chilling hatred. Julian's fingers froze, then slowly uncurled. He looked at Catherine as if she were a complete stranger. For 3 years, no matter how cold he was, no matter how much he ignored her, no matter how he forced her to yield, Catherine had never looked at him like this. Her eyes had always held a warm, forgiving, loving light. Now, that light was gone. Catherine bent down, picked up her case, and walked toward the end of the corridor. She had taken 3 steps when Julian's phone rang. The ringtone was a violin piece, Brooke's favorite. The screen lit up with the name Brooke, and a pink heart. Julian instinctively glanced at Catherine's back, then answered the call. "Julian, darling," Brooke's voice on the other end was soft and tearful. "I'm so nervous, my hands are shaking. Can you come to my dressing room? I'm afraid I'll walk on stage and forget the notes." "All right, I'll be right there." As Julian spoke those words, Catherine was already 10 steps away. He glanced at her retreating back, hesitated for less than half a second, then turned and walked quickly toward the wings. The sound of his shoes on the floor gradually faded. Catherine stopped. She didn't turn around. The fluorescent lights in the corridor hummed quietly, their light blindingly white. She stood in that white light as if all the blood had been drained from her. A wave of intense nausea rose in her stomach. She bent over, leaning a hand against the cold wall, and retched twice. Nothing came up, only bitter acid rising in her throat, burning like a gulp of fire. Her nails dug deep into the flesh of her palm. Blood dripped from her fingertips onto the pristine marble floor. Scarlet, shockingly bright. The drops of blood on the floor under the lights looked like scattered rubies. Catherine stared at them for a long time, then slowly straightened up. She took a tissue from her purse, leisurely wiped the blood from her palm, folded the blood-stained tissue into a neat square, and threw it into the trash can. Then she adjusted the hem of her dress. A few drops of blood had fallen on the black fabric, but they were almost invisible. Good. The main thing was that it wasn't visible. She picked up her case and walked toward the service exit. The moment she pushed the door open, thunderous applause and cheers erupted from the banquet hall. The host's excited voice boomed from the speakers. "Let's give a roaring welcome to tonight's final performer, Brooke Hayes." Applause, cheers, camera flashes. Catherine paused in the doorway. The night wind rushed in, blowing the hem of her dress back like a flag surrendering in the night. She didn't linger. 3 seconds later, she stepped into the darkness. The door slammed shut behind her, cutting off all the light and sound of the other world. It was raining outside. Not hard, but enough to soak you from head to toe. Catherine didn't open an umbrella. She walked with her case through the parking lot. Water streamed down her hair, over her cheekbones, her chin, trickling down her collarbones, making the expensive couture gown heavy. She walked to her ordinary white car, which looked out of place among the rows of luxury vehicles, opened the trunk, and placed the case inside. Then she got behind the wheel, closed the door, and started the engine. The windshield wipers began their monotonous work, clearing raindrops from the glass. Catherine sat at the wheel, her hands on it, not moving. The car was frighteningly quiet. The radio automatically turned on to a classical music station. The introduction to a solo cello piece began to play a live broadcast of the very piece Brooke was now performing on stage. This piece? Catherine closed her eyes. She had written this piece. 3 years ago, on a winter night, She had sat in the attic of the Sterling penthouse and composed all night long. Inspiration came like a breaking dam. Wrapped in a blanket, she wrote the melody note by note on the staff paper. Julian had come up to her in the middle of the night, draped his coat over her, and asked what she was writing. She had smiled and said it was her secret weapon for the final number at the American Virtuoso Prize. Later, those notes disappeared from her study. She had looked for them for a long time, thinking she had misplaced them while cleaning. Until today. Until she heard on the radio Brooke performing the very transition she had invented in the 37th bar. Catherine opened her eyes and sharply turned off the radio. A dead silence returned to the car, broken only by the patter of rain on the roof, and her own too rapid breathing. She looked at her hands on the steering wheel. The fingertips were covered in thick calluses. The first knuckle of her right middle finger was slightly deformed, an indelible mark of decades of intense practice. These hands had played the cello since she was 6, from an orphanage to a community center, from the community center to the conservatory, from the conservatory to the international stage. No family, no connections, no capital. Only these hands, bar by bar, had created the Catherine Reed of today. And now, with her own hands, she had signed her withdrawal. A sharp, stabbing pain flared in Catherine's chest, as if someone were sewing her heart with a needle. She took several deep breaths, suppressing the pain, and drove out of the parking lot. The rain grew heavier. She didn't drive to the Sterling penthouse. As of today, that place had nothing to do with her. She drove for 40 minutes and stopped at an old apartment complex in the suburbs. This was the apartment she had rented before marrying Julian. A one-bedroom, $2,500 a month. She hadn't terminated the lease, keeping it as a backup plan. She had always known she needed a backup plan. Catherine walked through the rain into the small apartment. When she turned on the light, the smell of dust from a long, unoccupied space hit her. She didn't change, still soaked, and sat on the edge of the bed, hugging her knees. She looked like a bird with broken wings caught in a storm, but she didn't cry, not a single tear. She just sat there, and all through the night, she ripped out the last remnants of warmth and illusion she had for Julian from her heart. She tore them out one by one, like deeply embedded needles. Each needle came out with blood, each one causing such pain that her whole body trembled, but she left none behind. Dawn broke, and the rain stopped. When Catherine stood up, her legs were numb from sitting in one position for so long. She changed into clean clothes. Her old clothes were still in the apartment, not designer brands. Just ordinary white shirts and jeans. She looked at herself in the mirror, without the $1,000,000 couture dress, without the halo of Mrs. Sterling, without the glory of the American Virtuoso Prize's final number. In the mirror was a woman with no makeup, with dark circles under her eyes and chapped lips, but with a clear and cold gaze. This was Catherine Reed. The real Catherine Reed. The cellist who started playing at 6 and clawed her way out of the mud, relying on no one but her own 2 hands. She turned on her phone. 67 missed calls, all from the orchestra and her agent, not a single one from Julian. The corner of her mouth twitched, whether in a smirk or from pain. Then she started going through the messages. A voicemail from the orchestra manager, his voice filled with alarm and anger. "Catherine, are you out of your mind? The resignation has already been submitted. Do you know the committee approved it? You've actually quit the orchestra. Do you understand what that means?" She understood. It meant that 10 years of her professional career had been wiped out in one night. All the leading symphony orchestras in the country, under pressure from Sterling's capital, would close their doors to her. She would become a performer without a stage. Like a violin that no one plays, its beautiful sound gathering dust in silence. But so what? Catherine put down her phone and walked to the window. The morning sun lit up the room, making every dust mote visible in the air. Suddenly, she felt that this small, shabby apartment was 1,000 times more like home than the 5,000-square-foot Sterling penthouse. There was no arrogant patronage from Julian, no hypocritical parasitism from Brooke, no suffocating supervision from servants and bodyguards. Here, there was only herself and the cello that needed her. That was enough. It was more than enough. Catherine opened her trunk and carried the cello upstairs. She placed the case by the bed, then sat down and began to plan her next steps. Step 1. Completely get rid of everything left in the Sterling house over the past 3 years. Not a single thread left behind, not a single penny taken. A clean and final break. Step 2. Her fingers swiped across the phone screen, opening a long-forgotten contact. A name she had kept for years but never once dialed. Because before she married Julian, she had promised someone, Unless it's absolutely necessary, don't contact me. That person had said, okay, and gave her a number. Catherine stared at the numbers for a long time. In the end, she didn't call. Not because she didn't need help, but because she didn't want to be indebted to anyone. First, she had to pull herself out of this swamp. If she could, then there was no need to bother anyone. She put the phone down and took a folder from the nightstand drawer. Inside were all her personal savings, the original copies of her performance contracts, and a long-prepared divorce agreement. Yes, she had prepared it a long time ago. Perhaps from the moment she first saw Julian look at Brooke with a tenderness that went beyond brotherly affection. That was a year and a half ago. She didn't make a scene, didn't ask questions. She just quietly went to a lawyer, quietly prepared everything, and quietly waited for the moment she would have to use it. That moment had arrived. At 2 p.m, Catherine arrived at the Sterling penthouse. The entire place was empty. When she walked in, the servants' faces showed clear surprise, followed by poorly concealed schadenfreude. News traveled fast. Catherine's resignation from the orchestra had already rocked their circles. Ignoring all the stairs, Catherine went straight to the second floor. In the master bedroom's walk-in closet, half the space was taken up by Julian's suits, and the other half by all the expensive clothes and jewelry he had bought her over the past 3 years. Each item was worth a fortune. Altogether, they were worth the price of a large apartment in the city center. Catherine stood in the middle of the closet, calmly surveying all the glittering treasures. Then she began to act. She took off item after item: necklaces, earrings, expensive watches, and limited edition handbags. Her movements were unhurried, as if she were cleaning out someone else's warehouse. She placed each removed item into a pre-prepared box. The servants watched from a distance, whispering like a swarm of buzzing flies. "What is Miss Reed doing?" The butler finally couldn't help but approach. "Packing," Catherine replied without looking up. "But these are all gifts from Mr. Sterling." "Yes, that's why I'm not taking any of it." The last thing Catherine took off was the black unlimited credit card from her wrist. Julian had given it to her on their first day of marriage, saying, "Spend as much as you want." In 3 years, she had used this card to buy flowers, groceries, ties for Julian, and medicine for her grandfather. But she had never bought anything for herself that cost more than $1,000. She placed the black card in the very center of the vanity table. Then she went to the study, turned on the shredder Julian used for his work documents. Whir. The shredder emitted a low hum. Catherine inserted the black card. "Miss Reed," the butler turned pale. "That card." Metal shavings rained from the shredder with a soft rustle. Catherine watched them fall into the wastebasket, and the corner of her mouth lifted slightly. "Tell Mr. Sterling that all his things are in place, and I haven't left a single one of my own. From today on, Catherine Reed has no connection to the Sterling family." The butler stood there, opening and closing his mouth, unable to find the words. Catherine took her personal belongings, just one small suitcase, and went down the stairs. At the door, she ran into Julian's younger brother's wife, who had just returned. The socialite looked Catherine up and down. Simple clothes. A tiny suitcase. A look of blatant contempt appeared on her face. "Oh, Catherine, are you going somewhere? I heard you made a big scene last night. Brooke was still crying this morning, said you scared her." Catherine didn't even glance at her, simply walked around her and headed for the door. "Hey, where are you going? Don't leave." The door slammed shut heavily behind her. Catherine stood at the gates of the Sterling estate. Opposite was an alley of neatly trimmed sycamore trees. The sun filtered through the leaves, leaving patches of light on her face. She took a deep breath. The air didn't have that suffocating, thick scent of money and power that permeated the Sterling property, just the fresh smell of leaves and earth. Clean. From today on, she would only breathe clean air. Catherine got into her car, took out her phone, and dialed a number. "Mr. Stevens, this is Catherine Reed." The divorce proceedings can officially begin. There was a 2-second silence on the other end. Then the lawyer's gruff voice came through. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." "All right. I'll send the documents to Julian Sterling's email today." "No," Catherine interrupted. "Don't send them yet. I need time to clarify something. Wait for my signal." "All right, Miss Reed. I'm at your disposal." Catherine hung up and placed the phone on the passenger seat. She looked at the straight road ahead, the sun making her squint. No, not yet. She needed to get 3 things first. First, proof that Brooke Hayes had stolen her sheet music. Second, proof that Julian Sterling had used his capital to interfere with the American Virtuoso Prize jury's decisions. Third, a complete chain of Olive Brooke Hayes's instances of unfair competition over the past 3 years using funds from Sterling Holdings. Until these things were obtained, the divorce agreement was just a piece of paper. Julian, with his capital, would crush her as easily as he had canceled her final performance today. Catherine had to prepare all her ammunition before starting the war. She knew it would take time. But that was fine. She had plenty of patience. The car started moving and merged into traffic. In the rearview mirror, the huge iron gates of the Sterling estate grew smaller and smaller, until they became an inconspicuous black dot and disappeared around a bend. Catherine didn't look back again. That same evening, at 9:17 p.m., Catherine's phone screen lit up. A message from Julian. Just 3 words. Come back. Stop this. Catherine looked at the 3 words, and the corners of her lips slowly curved into an arc, cold as a blade. She turned the phone face down and placed it on the table. Then she walked to the window, to the set-up music stand, turned on a warm yellow floor lamp, laid out a clean sheet of music paper, and picked up a pen. At that moment, her hands stopped trembling. All the hatred, all the pain, all the indignation would be turned into notes, into evidence, into the final verdict that would one day be presented to Julian and Brooke. At the very top of the music sheet, she wrote 4 words. It was the title of a new piece, only she knew what those words were. Outside the window, the thousands of city lights flickered, and Catherine sat under a single lamp, note by note, writing her new score. Quietly, confidently, like a tightly drawn bowstring, waiting for the moment of its release. On the 3rd day after Catherine left the Sterling home, a storm broke. Not from the heavens, but one instigated by Julian. As she sat on the floor of her rented apartment, sorting through sheet music, her phone began to vibrate uncontrollably. Messages poured in, one after another, all from her peers in the industry. Catherine, have you seen the news? Damn, what did you do to piss off Sterling? Girl, check the top news stories, fast. Catherine opened her social media. The main page was dominated by a single topic. Number Catherine Reed cancelled for unethical conduct. Under the hashtag was a lengthy 3,000-word article by a well-known music critic. In the piece, the author insinuated that during her time with the orchestra, Catherine Reed had led a promiscuous life, slept her way into roles, constantly bullied newcomers, and pressured her colleagues. The article was accompanied by several carefully cropped photos, ordinary pictures of Catherine with male colleagues at professional events, but cropped to create an ambiguous angle. The comments had already turned into a hellscape. No wonder she was stripped of the final number. Turns out this is what she's really like. Brooke Hayes is the real talent. Catherine Reed is just a social climbing careerist, a cancer in the music world. Good riddance. Catherine's fingers froze on the screen. She knew this critic. 3 years ago, he had fawned over her, begging for an interview. And now, a hit piece. It didn't take a genius to figure out that without capital backing, some minor critic wouldn't dare attack a 6-time international award winner, Julian Sterling. It was definitely him. Catherine exited the newsfeed, and her phone vibrated again. It was her agent, Marty. Catherine, it's a disaster. Marty's voice was strained with anxiety. Your solo concert at Carnegie Hall next month has been canceled. The organizers say it's a scheduling conflict, but I did some digging. A production company owned by Sterling sent a letter to all the venues saying you breached your contract, and any venue that works with you will be blacklisted by Sterling Holdings. Catherine closed her eyes for a moment. What else? Also, Marty's voice dropped to a whisper, as if he were afraid of being overheard. The Musicians Guild held an emergency meeting this afternoon. They're talking about reviewing all your awards from the past 5 years. The initiative came from the Guild's vice president, the one with close ties to Sterling Holdings. Catherine, they're trying to erase you. Catherine was silent. The familiar nausea rose in her stomach again. Acid climbed up her throat, and she swallowed it down with effort. Catherine, listen to me, Marty whispered. I don't know what happened between you and Julian Sterling, but in a situation like this, maybe you should consider backing down? At least for now. Impossible, Catherine's voice was calm, not sounding like someone being targeted by an entire industry. Marty, if you're afraid this will affect you, you can terminate our contract right now. I won't blame you. A long silence hung on the other end of the line. Then Marty sighed. I'll think about it. You hang in there. The call ended. Catherine put down the phone and noticed her hands were trembling slightly. She clenched her fists so tightly her knuckles turned white. The shaking gradually subsided. So these were Julian's methods. No noise, no blood. He didn't need to show up himself. A single phone call, a single letter from a lawyer to pertains to percent of capital was enough to make a person an outcast in the entire industry. Catherine had seen him do this to others. 3 years ago, when Sterling Holdings was acquiring a small record label, the owner refused to sell. In just 2 weeks, Julian had the company's bank loans rescinded, poached its key employees, and had its partners terminate their contracts. In the end, the man signed the transfer agreement, his hands shaking. Back then, Catherine had stood by Julian's side and thought it was just business, that it didn't concern her. Now, it was her turn. Catherine stood up and walked to the window. People bustled on the street below. No one knew that on the 6th floor of this old building lived a woman who was being hunted by an entire industry. Her phone lit up again. A message from Julian. Seen the news? Come back, and I'll order them to take it all down. A second message followed. I'm giving you one more day. Don't make me go all the way. Catherine stared at the 2 messages, feeling a lump form in her throat. It wasn't hurt. It was a thick, insoluble disgust. This man was threatening her professional life to force her back into a golden cage, and he thought it was a matter of course. He thought he had the right. Catherine didn't reply. She just deleted the conversation with Julian. Not blocking would show that he still mattered to her. Just quietly deleted the conversation, as if wiping away a dirty stain, cleanly and neatly. Then she dialed another number. Mr. Stevens, help me check something. 3 years ago, a draft of a score went missing from my study. Is it still possible to get the recordings from the home security cameras? 3 years ago? The lawyer was clearly surprised. That long ago, home cameras usually store recordings for 6 months to a year. The smart security system in the Sterling home was custom-made. All data is uploaded to the cloud and stored indefinitely. I need you to find a legal way to access those recordings without Julian's knowledge. That will be very difficult. It's the Sterling family's private data. I am a co-owner of the house. The prenuptial agreement states in black and white that I have the right to joint use and access to information concerning the primary Sterling residence. Approach it from that angle. The lawyer was silent for a few seconds. I'll try. Catherine hung up. She knew this path would be difficult, but she had to walk it. She had written that score herself. The draft had her notes, watermarks with the creation date, traces of ink from her limited edition fountain pen. If she could get video evidence that Brooke had stolen that score from her study, she could turn everything around. But before she could turn the tables, she had to solve another, more urgent problem. Her grandfather's medication. Catherine's grandfather, Arthur, was 83. He had once been a titan of American classical music, but a stroke 15 years ago had left him paralyzed. Since then, he required an imported experimental drug to slow the progression of his illness. The drug could only be obtained in the country through a private clinic owned by Sterling Holdings. 3 years ago, when Catherine married Julian, the Sterling family had taken over all of her grandfather's medical expenses. He was placed in the best VIP suite at the Sterling Clinic. Now she had left. What would happen to her grandfather? This question was a splinter lodged in the softest part of Catherine's heart. She could accept a ruined career, a tarnished reputation, exile from her circle. But her grandfather was her only family in this world. At 6, her own parents had left her at the gates of an orphanage. It was her grandfather, at a charity concert, who had accidentally discovered her talent, taken her in, and lovingly trained her. Later, when her grandfather had his stroke, she had worked herself to the bone, giving concerts to earn money for his treatment, but it was only enough for basic medical care. When she married Julian, she did it half for love, and half so her grandfather could get the best care. Now, her greatest vulnerability was in Julian's crosshairs. And so, on the 4th morning, the call from the hospital came. Miss Reed, we regret to inform you that Mr. Arthur's VIP suite needs to be vacated due to system-wide changes. Additionally, there have been issues with the supply of his experimental medication. Next month's dose may not arrive on time. What does that mean? Catherine's voice turned sharp and cold. My grandfather has been in your hospital for 3 years. His condition has only just stabilized. And you want to stop his treatment and transfer him? There's nothing we can do. This is an order from above. Who is above? The person on the other end hesitated for a long time, then squeezed out. Miss Reed, we really can't say. Perhaps you should contact Mr. Sterling? Catherine hung up. Her fingers had gone cold. She stood at the window of her rented apartment, her body starting to shake uncontrollably. It wasn't from the cold. It was a bone-deep terror mixed with fury at being cornered. Her grandfather was her life. Julian could touch her, but not her grandfather. Catherine closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. She forced herself to breathe slower. 1, 2, 3. Don't panic, especially not now. This was exactly what Julian wanted to force her to surrender by using her grandfather. If she ran to him now and begged on her knees, it would all be over. She would be locked back in the golden cage, and she would never get out. And her grandfather? If he found out she had gone back to endure humiliation for his sake, he would hate himself for the rest of his life. At the thought of her grandfather, Catherine's eyes finally stung, but she bit her lower lip hard, swallowing the rising bitterness. She needed help. She needed a power that could stand against the sterling capital. Catherine opened her phone book, found the long-forgotten number. Her finger hovered over the call button for a full 30 seconds. Then she pressed it. After 3 rings, a low, calm, and confident male voice answered on the other end, with the same warmth as many years ago. Catherine? Catherine opened her mouth and realized her voice was hoarse. Alexander, I need your help. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then the same voice said, Tell me. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't even ask if she was in trouble. Just one word. Tell me. As if he had been waiting for this call for a very long time. As if he would agree to anything she asked. Catherine, swallowing the tremor in her throat, said word for word, My grandfather is at the Sterling Private Clinic. Julian wants to stop his treatment and discharge him. I don't have the means to fight the Sterling Holdings medical system right now. I need a place that can continue his treatment. Send me the address. What? Which room is your grandfather in now? Send me the address. My medical team will be there in half an hour. Catherine froze. Half an hour. He said half an hour. She hadn't even explained all the circumstances, hadn't told him about her relationship with Julian. He had made the decision in less than 10 seconds. Alexander. Catherine's voice suddenly broke. This could affect your business dealings with Sterling Holdings. I have no business dealings with Sterling Holdings. Alexander Blackwell's voice was even, as if he were talking about the weather. He doesn't have that privilege. Send the address. Catherine sent the hospital's address. After sending it, she stood for a long time with the phone in her hand. Her palms were sweaty. It wasn't tension. It was a strange feeling of being caught. The feeling of falling that had plagued her for 3 days had suddenly been stopped by someone's invisible but firm hand. 28 minutes later, when Catherine arrived at the hospital, 3 black armored vans were parked at the entrance. There were no logos on the vehicles, but their understated luxury surpassed all the flashy sports cars in Julian's garage by several orders of magnitude. She quickly entered the building and saw the scene in the corridor from a distance. 4 guards in black uniforms stood outside her grandfather's room, their faces impassive, their presence making the nurses on the entire floor keep their distance. Inside the room, 3 people in white coats were hastily reviewing Arthur's health indicators. In the lead, Catherine recognized Professor Werner, one of the top 3 neurologists in Europe. A name that lived in the pages of medical journals had now appeared in this small room. And at the entrance to the room, his back to her, stood a man, tall, with incredibly broad shoulders. His dark blue suit was tailored so perfectly it looked like a second skin. He was quietly speaking to his assistant, and Catherine could only catch the last fragments of his words. She approached. Alexander Blackwell turned around. In 5 years, he had barely changed. The lines of his face had become even more confident, his lips still thin and stern, the curve of his chin as sharp as a blade. But when his gaze fell on Catherine, something so hot flashed in his dark eyes that it completely contradicted his cold features, as if an ocean of lava was hidden beneath an icy mountain. "You're here," he said, just one word, but his intonation was slightly lifted, with a hint of relief. Catherine stood before him, suddenly not knowing what to say. Alexander glanced at her one look, and he noticed her pale lips, the dark circles under her eyes, the dried blood on her fingertips. His brows twitched almost imperceptibly but immediately returned to their usual position. "Your grandfather's condition has already been assessed by Professor Werner." He turned and handed her a report, his voice once again businesslike and calm. "There will be no problems with the medication supply. Blackwell Biopharma has its own independent import channels. Tomorrow morning, I will arrange for special transport to transfer him to the Blackwell Rehabilitation Center. The equipment and care there are the best in the world." Catherine took the report, flipping through a couple of pages. It contained all of her grandfather's analyses and a treatment plan written personally by Professor Werner. Everything was detailed, down to the amount of water to drink and the frequency of turning. The payment, Catherine began. Don't worry about it, Alexander said. She looked up at him. I don't want to be in your debt. You're not. Alexander met her gaze, his voice suddenly softer. 5 years ago, you promised not to contact me unless it was absolutely necessary. Today you called. He paused. For me, the fact that you decided to make this call is the greatest gratitude. Catherine's throat tightened. She wanted to say thank you, but felt the word would sound trite and empty. She opened her mouth, but in the end, said nothing, just silently nodded. Alexander didn't press either. He stood beside her for a moment, then said quietly, Go in, see your grandfather. I'll wait outside. When Catherine entered the room, her grandfather was lying on the bed with his eyes closed. The 83-year-old man was as thin as a dry branch, his skin so translucent that the veins showed through. A tube from a breathing apparatus protruded from his nose, and a heart monitor beeped steadily. Catherine approached the bed, knelt, and gently took her grandfather's dry hand. The old man's fingers were cold, bony, the tips still showing signs of deformation from decades of playing the cello. Just like the ones on Catherine's right middle finger. Grandfather, she whispered. So quietly it was as if she were afraid to disturb something. Arthur didn't react. He hadn't been fully conscious for a long time. Catherine held his hand, pressing her forehead against the edge of the bed. She didn't cry, just sat quietly, her shoulders trembling slightly, as if she were struggling to suppress something. Outside, Alexander's assistant was reporting quietly. Mr. Blackwell, Sterling Holdings, has noticed our intervention. Julian Sterling's secretary has called 3 times, asking if Blackwell intends to go against them. Alexander, leaning against the corridor wall, watched the slender figure hunched by the bed through the glass. Don't answer, he said. But a man who uses his wife's grandfather as a hostage. Alexander's voice suddenly turned as cold as winter iron. Does not deserve to have his calls answered by me. The assistant immediately fell silent. Alexander glanced once more at Catherine in the room, then turned and walked toward the elevator. After a few steps, he stopped and, without turning, told his assistant. And one more thing. Collect and document all the negative information about Catherine Reed online from the past few days. Every article, every comment, every forward. Save all the source data. Mr. Blackwell, is this too? Don't rush. Just collect it. Alexander stepped into the elevator. Before the doors closed, he cast a final glance at the door of the room and pressed the button for the top floor. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, on the 57th floor of the Sterling Holdings headquarters, Julian Sterling stood by the panoramic window, clutching his phone so tightly it nearly cracked. He had just received news that Catherine's grandfather had been taken from the hospital by people from Blackwell, using authority at the level of the president of the global medical group, Blackwell. The name Alexander Blackwell was like a needle piercing Julian's temple. Check, he turned to his assistant, his voice choked with rage. Check what relationship Catherine Reed has with Alexander Blackwell. Mr. Sterling, Blackwell, and we are in different leagues. If they've decided to protect her, I said check. The assistant hastily retreated. Julian turned back to the window. The city skyline stretched out in the night haze, thousands of lights like golden dust scattered on a black map. His reflection in the glass, a handsome face, distorted by anger and bewilderment. Catherine had left 3 days ago. Just 3 days. In those 3 days, Julian initially felt a sense of relief. No more having to listen to her ambiguous reproaches, no more having to look into her perceptive eyes, no more being torn between her and Brooke. He even felt a certain lightness. Brooke moved into the master bedroom, this fragile girl clinging to him, whispering sweetly, Julian, darling, finally, you don't have to put up with her anymore. Julian stroked her hair, and it seemed to him that the world had finally found peace. But not even 48 hours had passed before this lightness began to sour. The first evening, he habitually expected a bowl of the warm mushroom soup that Catherine made for him every night to appear on the table. Of course, there was nothing on the table. Brooke didn't know how to cook, and the servants' cooking wasn't the same. The next morning, as he was leaving, he instinctively reached for the rack in the hallway for the silk tie that Catherine picked out for him every day to match his schedule. The closet was half empty. All traces of Catherine had vanished, as if she had never been in this house. On the third day, Brooke was lounging on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, while the coffee table was piled high with takeout boxes. Julian, frowning, walked past her, and the mixed smell of food and strong perfume made him feel sick. He remembered Catherine's scent, light, the fragrance of pine and rosin from the strings, clean, like the first winter snow. Julian shook his head sharply, banishing the thought. What was he thinking? She left, so she left. What was so special about that ungrateful woman? But when he sent that message, "Come back. Stop this," Catherine hadn't replied, hadn't even read it, as if he himself didn't exist. This feeling was extremely unpleasant for Julian. For 3 years, 3 long years, no matter how cold he was, no matter how much he ignored her, no matter how he forced her to yield to Brooke, Catherine was always there, always gently waiting for his return, always forgiving everything. She was like a fixed point of reference. No matter how Julian's world spun, all he had to do was turn around, and she was there. Now that point of reference was gone. And, worst of all, she had found refuge with Alexander Blackwell. This realization, like a red-hot brand, seared Julian's pride. Alexander Blackwell, the man at the very top of the financial pyramid. Sterling Holdings was just a mid-sized regional company in comparison. If it weren't for Catherine, Julian would never have wanted to deal with that name. He couldn't afford it. "Julian, darling," Brooke crept up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Why are you all alone and sad over here? Thinking about her again?" "No." "Well, it's good that she's gone." Brooke pressed her cheek against his back, her voice laced with unconcealed triumph disguised as concern. "I've been telling you for a long time she doesn't deserve you. Look how ugly she was when she left. Quit the orchestra. Took her things. Doesn't she realize she's nothing without you?" Brooke paused and added in her most fragile voice, "Julian, darling, I'm not cruel like she is. I'll never leave you. Just be good to me." Julian was silent. He looked out at the city at night, and Catherine's final glance involuntarily surfaced in his mind. So cold. A coldness he had never seen before. Brooke continued to chatter behind him, but her words became blurry, as if coming from underwater. "By the way, Julian," Brooke suddenly changed the subject, tugging at his sleeve. "I want a new cello. You know, that antique Italian one, 300 years old? I heard Catherine had the same model. I want one exactly like it too." Julian finally turned and looked at Brooke without any expression. "What do you need a cello for?" "What do you mean, what for? To play? Now I'm the main star of the American Virtuoso Prize. I'll be invited to all the concerts. You can't even play scales in tune." Brooke's smile froze. Julian, as if realizing he had been too harsh, rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Fine. I'll tell my assistant to arrange it tomorrow. Don't bother me, I need to work." Brooke pouted, but quickly put her mask of fragile innocence back on. She stood on her tiptoes, kissed Julian on the cheek, and skipped off to the bedroom. Julian remained standing, a vein throbbing in his forehead. Brooke wanted a cello, exactly like Catherine's. Ridiculous. Catherine had played for 20 years, the calluses on her fingers harder than stone. Brooke had studied for 3 years and couldn't even hold a basic intonation. In her hands, the best instrument would just be a decoration. Just like the final number at the American Virtuoso Prize. In her hands, it was just a show bought with money. As soon as the thought arose, Julian suppressed it. No, Brooke had depression. She needed care and support. Catherine was too strong. She didn't need it. He had done the right thing. Definitely the right thing. Julian loosened his tie and chugged a glass of ice water, trying to quench an inexplicable irritation. But the ice water didn't help. The irritation only grew, spreading like a weed. Catherine was gone. She was really gone. And she had turned to Alexander Blackwell. Maybe they had been having an affair all along? This thought, once rooted, quickly poisoned Julian's entire mind like venom. Rage, annoyance, bewilderment, all emotions mixed into a thick black sludge that was stuck in his chest and wouldn't dissipate. He grabbed his phone and texted Catherine again. "If you dare to have any kind of relationship with another man, the consequences will be on your conscience." After sending it, he stared at the screen for 10 minutes. Delivered. Not read. Still not read. Julian threw the phone onto the sofa. And in a small rented apartment in the suburbs, the screen of Catherine's phone lit up for a moment and then went dark again. She didn't even look. At that moment, Catherine was sitting on the floor. A huge sheet of paper spread out in front of her. A timeline was drawn on it with a marker. From the disappearance of the score 3 years ago to the cancellation of the final number today, every key moment was clearly marked. Names, dates, events, amounts, and connections, all highlighted in different colors. Red for irrefutable facts. Blue for assumptions that needed verification. Black for missing evidence. She chewed on the cap of her pen and stared at the sheet for a long time. Then she picked up the pen and boldly circled Brooke Hayes' name. Next to the circle, she wrote 3 words. Original score. This was the beginning of everything. If she could prove that Brooke stole her score, everything else would collapse like dominoes. The cancellation of the final number at the American Virtuoso Prize would become illegal. The smear campaign in the music world and abuse of Sterling's capital. And all of Brooke's honors and fame over the years would turn to dust. Under the words original score, Catherine added another line. Need data from the Sterling Homes smart security cloud for the past 3 years. This was the toughest nut to crack, but also the most lethal bullet. She put down the pen, stood up, and walked to the window. It was already late. In the building opposite, most of the windows were dark. Only a few still glowed. Catherine pressed her forehead against the cold glass and exhaled deeply. The warm breath left a small patch of condensation on the glass. She traced a single word on it with her finger. After writing it, she looked at it and then wiped it away. No one knew what that word was. But her gaze, after she wiped it away, became even more resolute, like a blade forged in fire. The bullet Catherine was waiting for was delivered to her on the 11th day. The call from her lawyer, Mr. Stevens, came earlier than expected, at 2 in the morning. Catherine was still at her music stand, working on the 4th movement of her new composition, when her phone suddenly lit up. I got them. Stevens's voice was quiet, but laced with clear excitement and tension. The backup from the Sterling Homes smart security cloud. All the footage from the corridor and the study from September 14th to 17th, 3 years ago. We acted through the right to access information about joint marital property. The procedure was entirely legal. Catherine's hand, holding the pen, froze. What does it show? September 15th, at 3:27 a.m. Your study. The lawyer took a deep breath. Brooke Hayes. She entered the study alone. She rummaged through the drawer where you kept your music for almost 10 minutes. She left with a folder in her hands. Specifically, your dark blue music folder. The recording quality is very high. You can even see the expression on her face as she was rummaging. Catherine closed her eyes for a moment. 3 years. For 3 years, she thought she had carelessly lost the music. For 3 years, she had watched Brooke perform with that composition, receive awards, and say in interviews, I didn't sleep for 3 months writing this piece. It's my baby. She had had her suspicions, but no proof. Now she had proof. Anything else? She asked. Yes. On September 14th at 11:40 p.m., before entering the study, Brooke Hayes briefly spoke with another person in the second-floor hallway. The lawyer paused. It was Julian Sterling's personal butler, James. They talked for about 30 seconds. Since there's no audio in the hallway, we don't know what they said. But from their body language, it's clear James handed something to Brooke. It looks like a key. Catherine's nails dug deep into her thigh. The pain was sharp. A key. The door to her study was always locked. She had wondered how Brooke got in. So, it was James, Julian's man. Then the question arose. Did Julian know? Is Julian in the footage? No. Julian wasn't home during that period. His schedule shows he was at a reception at the Chamber of Commerce. But James is his personal butler. He wouldn't do something like that without his master's knowledge. Catherine was silent. Stevens added, Of course, this isn't direct proof that Julian knew. But if it goes to court, this footage will at least prove the theft by Brooke. Combined with the creation date on your draft, the watermarks, and the graphological analysis, it will form a complete body of evidence. We're not going to court yet. What? I said. Not yet. Catherine's voice was calm. Too calm for someone who had just received irrefutable proof of her 3-year-old grievance. Make 3 encrypted backups of this footage. Store them in your firm's safe, on my personal cloud drive, and, she thought for a moment, and in the safe of the Blackwell legal department. Blackwell? The lawyer was clearly astonished. You and Blackwell, just do as I say. All right. After hanging up, Catherine put down her phone and leaned back in her chair. There was a thin crack on the ceiling, stretching from the lamp to the corner of the wall. She stared at the crack for a long time, her breathing gradually evening out. She didn't act immediately for one simple reason. The timing was wrong. Right now, Julian was smearing her across the industry. Public opinion was against her. If she released this evidence now, Julian, using his capital and media resources, could easily bury it. He would say the footage was fake, that Catherine was slandering him, and drag the case through the courts for 3 to 5 years. She couldn't afford to lose this battle. She would wait. Wait for the moment when Julian and Brooke were completely unprepared. The moment of their greatest arrogance, triumph, and carelessness. And then she would strike the fatal blow. That moment came very soon. 3 days later, Brooke Hayes' team loudly announced on social media. On the 28th of this month, Sterling Holdings will host the Classics and Stars charity music evening at the Plaza Hotel. The sole solo performer of the evening will be Brooke Hayes. Over 200 celebrities and representatives from leading media outlets are expected to attend. The announcement was accompanied by a promotional photo of Brooke in a snow-white dress, with a cello, a smile on her face. In the background, golden notes and her name written in an artistic font. Catherine saw this announcement while she was at the Blackwell Rehabilitation Center visiting her grandfather. The old man's condition had improved significantly. After Professor Werner adjusted his treatment plan, Arthur sometimes opened his eyes. Though he couldn't speak, a flicker of recognition would sometimes appear in his cloudy old eyes. Every time Catherine visited, she would play the cello for him. The corners of the old man's lips would twitch slightly. The nurse said he was smiling. Catherine was sitting on a bench in the center's garden when she saw Brooke's post. She read it 3 times, and the corners of her lips slowly curled upwards. The Plaza Hotel, 200 celebrities, leading media, Brooke's solo concert. Wasn't this the very moment she had been waiting for? That same day, Catherine arranged a meeting with Alexander. The meeting place was a private lounge on the top floor of the Blackwell Tower. The panoramic windows offered the most luxurious view of the city, but Catherine had no time for scenery. She sat on the sofa, placing a triple encrypted file containing the video evidence on the coffee table. Alexander sat opposite her, his long fingers resting loosely on the armrest. He read the file's annotation and looked up at her. "You're planning to strike at this charity event?" It wasn't a question, but a statement. Catherine nodded. "On the 28th, Brooke's territory, Julian's event. All the media will be there. If the evidence is released in that setting, the effect will be maximal," Alexander finished for her. "Correct." Alexander was silent for a few seconds, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and looked Catherine in the eyes. "How will you get in?" "Julian won't send you an invitation. And knowing his character, security will put you on the blacklist that day." Catherine smiled. The smile was light, but it had such a chilling sharpness that it sent a shiver down one's spine. "Brooke herself will invite me." Alexander raised an eyebrow in surprise. "She will definitely do it," Catherine said, "because she needs my presence. The presence of a humiliated predecessor, cast out of the profession, unable to afford a ticket, forced to watch her triumph from afar. She needs it to highlight her success. It's her greatest vanity." Alexander said nothing, but the corners of his lips twitched slightly, as if he were holding back a laugh. "Are you sure she'll do that?" "She already has." Catherine took out her phone and showed Alexander a message. It was a direct message from Brooke, sent at 11 a.m. that day. "Kathy, I know you probably don't want to see me, but I really hope you'll come to the concert on the 28th. You've always been my idol. Your opinion is very important to me. I've already asked them to leave a ticket for you in the general admission section. If it's convenient for you, you can pick it up yourself. I'm not insisting. I just want you to know that I haven't forgotten your help." Every word was soft and caring, flawless, and under every word was unconcealed boasting and a desire to humiliate. General admission section. She had specifically emphasized general admission. Alexander, after reading the message, didn't change his expression, but his fingers, hanging by his side, clenched into a fist so tight his knuckles turned white. "What do you need me to do?" His voice was even. "2 things." Catherine held up 2 fingers. "First, get me a VIP pass for that evening. Not a regular ticket. I want to sit in the front row of the VIP section, right in front of Brooke, so that when she looks up from the stage, the first thing she sees is me. And the second? Second, connect me with 3 or more independent international media outlets. Not the domestic ones tied to Sterling's capital, but real, authoritative international music publications. Make sure their journalists are there on the 28th. Alexander leaned back in his chair and looked Catherine in the eye. At that moment, her eyes were like 2 perfectly polished obsidians, cold, bright, without a single impurity. "Anything else?" "No, I'll handle the rest myself." Alexander nodded. Then he stood up, walked to the panoramic window, and, with his back to Catherine, said, "On the 28th, I'm going with you." Catherine froze. "You don't have to. Your appearance at such an event?" I said, "I'm going with you." Alexander didn't turn around, but his voice left no room for argument. "When you walk through that door, you shouldn't be alone." Catherine opened her mouth to say something, but in the end, she remained silent. Because she suddenly realized that from the moment she called him, Alexander had never once let her face anything alone. Not because he thought she was weak and needed protection, but because he chose to stand by her side. Catherine only understood the difference between these two things after 3 years of marriage to Julian. "Okay," she said quietly. "Just one word." But they both understood its weight. The 28th, the Plaza Hotel. Evening, 7 o'clock. The guests were more numerous than ever. The Plaza's ballroom had been transformed into a magnificent miniature concert hall. In the center of the stage stood a shining cello, the spotlights reflecting off its body, creating a fairy tale glow. At the entrance, a red carpet stretched to the steps. Celebrities in pairs and groups walked down it, sparkling with jewels and rustling in their evening wear. The air was thick with the scent of perfume. Julian Sterling stood at the main table in the back of the hall. In a black, custom-tailored suit, he looked impeccable. He greeted each guest with a smile, that special smile of a high-status person that is welcoming but keeps you at a distance. Brooke Hayes had not yet appeared. According to the program, she was scheduled to take the stage only after dinner, during the solo portion. Right now, she was probably getting ready backstage. Everything was under Julian's control. This evening was not only for promoting Brooke, but also a PR campaign for Sterling Holdings. After Catherine's departure from the orchestra, rumors had started to spread that Sterling Holdings was being too aggressive in the world of classical music. Tonight's charity event was meant to prove to everyone that Sterling Holdings was the main patron and protector of classical music, and Brooke Hayes was the new star nurtured by the company. As for Catherine Reed, she was just a failure who had ruined her career out of jealousy. Julian, holding a glass, took a small sip. The curve of his lips was calculated to the millimeter. At 7:30 p.m., there was some movement by the side door of the hall. Several ladies from the front rows of the VIP section turned their heads simultaneously. Whispers spread quickly through the hall. Julian frowned and looked in that direction. His glass froze halfway to his mouth. At the entrance stood Catherine Reed. She was wearing a simple black velvet dress. No jewelry, no accessories. Her hair was simply gathered in a low bun, revealing a long, elegant neck. She looked clean and sharp, like a newly polished blade. Without any extra adornments, her innate cold grace and stage presence outshone 90% of the ladies present in their bright outfits. And next to her stood Alexander Blackwell, a man in a dark gray three-piece suit. In his buttonhole, a discreet platinum lapel pin. His hand rested lightly on Catherine's waist, not as a gesture of ownership, but as a sign of protection. Natural, calm, unobtrusive, but his mere presence seemed to freeze the air in the hall. Alexander Blackwell, the true head of the financial empire Blackwell. Of the 200 celebrities present, you could count on one hand those for whom he would attend an event. And here he was, as Catherine Reed's companion. The whispers in the hall turned into a boiling cauldron. "That's Blackwell. How did he get here? Does Reed have connections with Blackwell? They said she was kicked out of the music world. How does she have the nerve to come? Are you stupid? Blackwell himself came with her. What other music world does she need?" Julian's fingers gripped the glass so tightly they turned white. He watched as Catherine and Alexander walked side by side, as Alexander whispered something in her ear, and a faint smile appeared on Catherine's lips. Then they walked together to the front row of the VIP section and sat in the very center. That seat, the best seat for viewing, right in front of the stage, with an unobstructed view. According to the seating chart, it had been reserved for one of Sterling Holdings' investor partners. Now, Catherine and Alexander were sitting there. Julian put down his glass. A throbbing started in his temples. Mr. Sterling, the assistant, quickly approached with a worried face. The seat in the front row of the VIP section. Half an hour ago, Blackwell bought the seat from that investor on behalf of their corporation. Our people couldn't stop them. I see. Maybe. Don't touch them. Julian's voice was low and icy. Let Brooke prepare well. The main thing tonight is her performance. The assistant wanted to say something but fell silent and retreated. Julian picked up his glass again, a mask of impeccable calm on his face. But only he knew how hard he was gritting his teeth. Catherine. Fine. Since you dared to come, Let's see who will be more embarrassed tonight. Dinner proceeded in an atmosphere of social chatter. Catherine sat in the VIP section, eating calmly, drinking water, occasionally talking with Alexander. Her face was even and serene, with no signs of nervousness or hostility. But everyone in the hall was looking at her. In their gazes were curiosity, sympathy, schadenfreude, and speculation. Catherine seemed not to notice, or she didn't care. At 8:45 p.m., the lights began to dim. The host walked onto the stage. Distinguished guests, and now, the most anticipated moment of our evening. Let's give a thunderous round of applause to the new star of classical music. Nurtured by Sterling Holdings, the final performer of the American Virtuoso Prize, Miss Brooke Hayes. Applause erupted. The spotlight focused on the side of the stage. Brooke Hayes slowly walked out, in a snow-white gown with a train, with her hair down, her makeup as perfect as a painting. She held the expensive cello bought by Julian and bowed slightly. Her smile was sweet and shy. Thank you, everyone. Tonight, I will perform a piece that has special meaning for me. I wrote this stellar ballad over 3 years. In every note are my soul and my tears. Brooke spoke into the microphone, her voice soft and touching. Someone in the hall let out a sympathetic sigh. Catherine sat in the front row, in the very center, less than 15 feet from the stage. The moment Brooke looked up, their eyes met. Brooke's smile froze for 0.3 seconds, but she quickly recovered. After all, she had invited her. Catherine's presence was expected, but she was supposed to be in the general admission section. Brooke's gaze quickly scanned the hall. Her pupils contracted. Catherine was sitting in the front row of the VIP section, and next to her a man, a stranger, but the mere sight of him took her breath away. Brooke's fingers instinctively gripped the bow. Don't panic. It's nothing. Let her watch. Today's main character is me, anyway. Brooke took a deep breath, sat on the chair, set up the cello, and raised the bow. When the first note sounded, Catherine's fingers on the armrest twitched slightly. This introduction, this melody. She could hum it with her eyes closed, because she had written it. On a winter night 3 years ago, under the warm lamplight, note by note, Brooke's performance lasted about 3 minutes. Technically, you couldn't say it was bad. The basic skills, into which $5 million had been invested, were evident. But Catherine heard that there was no soul in Brooke's performance. Every note was correct, but every note was empty, like a beautiful porcelain vase with nothing inside. When Brooke reached the middle of the second movement, she looked up. It was a common gesture performers often look up during emotionally intense moments to express feelings. But as she looked up, Brooke met Catherine's gaze again. And on Catherine's face, there was no anger, no envy, no pain, only a calm, almost compassionate expression, as if she were looking at someone who didn't know they were about to fall into a chasm. Brooke's fingers trembled. The tremor was barely perceptible. Only a very keen ear could catch the fleeting instability in the sound. But Catherine, sitting in the front row, heard it clearly. Brooke forced herself to look away from Catherine and focus on the strings. The performance continued. 8 minutes later, the final note sounded. Applause erupted again, loud, sustained. Brooke stood up, bowed. Relief appeared in her smile. She had done it. Done it in front of Catherine. She had won. To the applause, Brooke waved slightly to the audience, then did something no one expected. She took the microphone and looked toward Catherine. Tonight, we have a special guest in the audience, my predecessor. Brooke's voice was soft and sincere. Kathy, I know you've always been my goal and my idol. And although there have been some misunderstandings between us, I want to say in front of everyone, thank you. Your presence has inspired me to reach this day. 200 pairs of eyes immediately turned to Catherine. Julian, in the corner of the hall, narrowed his eyes. A clever move. Publicly show goodwill, put herself in a humble position, and put Catherine on a pedestal. If Catherine didn't respond, she would seem petty. If she responded with thanks, she would be publicly acknowledging Brooke's achievements as legitimate. No matter what she did, Catherine would lose. The hall fell silent for 2 seconds, and then Catherine moved. She didn't stand up, she just slightly raised her head, meeting Brooke's gaze, and under the eyes of everyone present, her lips slowly parted. Brooke Hayes, her voice was not loud, but the hall's acoustics were excellent. Every word was clearly audible to everyone. In the stellar ballad you just performed, in bars 37 through 42 of the second movement, You use a very rare transition from C-sharp major to B-flat minor. Brooke's smile froze. That technique, Catherine continued, her voice even and measured, as if she were explaining a problem in a lesson. I invented it 3 years ago. I wrote it down in a draft. That draft later went missing. The air in the hall suddenly thickened. Brooke's face, under the spotlights, began to pale noticeably. Kathy, what are you talking about? Her voice began to tremble. I wrote this composition myself. I have journals of my creative process. Do you? Catherine stood up. She rose slowly, but when she straightened up, it felt as if the pressure in the hall had dropped. 5 feet 8 inches tall, plus an innate stage presence even in the simplest black dress, she looked like a naked blade. Then let's compare. Catherine took a flash drive from her purse and held it up in the spotlight. There are 2 things on here. First, a scan of my draft. It has my handwritten notes, a watermark with the creation date, an expert's conclusion, and a chemical analysis of the ink, proving that this composition was written by me more than 3.5 years ago. Brooke's lips trembled. Second, Catherine's voice suddenly rose half a tone, as cold as a winter wind. The surveillance footage from the second-floor study of the Sterling home, from September 15th, 3 years ago, 3:27 a.m. The hall erupted. 200 celebrities simultaneously let out suppressed gasps and began to whisper. Journalists frantically clicked their shutters, the flashes merging into a solid white curtain. Brooke's face went from white to gray. She turned sharply to Julian, who was standing in the corner. His glass had already fallen onto the carpet, the wine staining his trousers. His face was even worse than Brooke's. The veins in his temples were bulging. You're lying! Brooke's piercing scream came from the microphone. I wrote this composition. I have 3 years of records. On what grounds? On what grounds? Catherine tilted her head slightly. On the grounds of you rummaging through my desk drawer for 10 minutes on this footage? Or on the grounds of the Sterling's butler personally handing you the key? Brooke's body swayed violently. The bow clattered to the floor. No. That's not... You faked it. That footage is fake. Catherine chuckled. There was not a shred of warmth in the smile. Brooke, the smart security system in the Sterling home was developed by SaferTech, one of the top 3 global leaders. The data is uploaded to a corporate-level cloud with a blockchain timestamp, which is recognized worldwide as immutable. Do you want to argue with SaferTech's technical team about the possibility of forgery? Brooke was completely at a loss for words. She stood in the center of the stage under the gaze of 200 people, trembling like a leaf in the wind about to be torn apart. Catherine looked at her. 3 years. This woman had stolen her creation, worn her feathers, bathed in her glory, accepted applause and flowers that should have been hers. And she had been forced to endure in the shadows, to yield, to be stripped of everything. But now, here, in this place, stood she, Catherine Reed, and under the spotlights, defenseless, stood Brooke. That's all I have to say. Catherine put the flash drive away, her voice once again calm and even. As for further legal proceedings, my legal team will be in touch with the relevant parties. She turned and walked back to her seat. The moment she sat down, Alexander discreetly handed her a glass of water at the perfect temperature. Catherine took it, took a sip. Her palms were sweaty, but not a single muscle in her face twitched. Brooke, on stage, collapsed onto the chair as if her bones had dissolved. Her gaze was unfocused. The host stood beside her, bewildered, opening his mouth but unable to utter a sound. And Julian... He stood in the corner, his eyes fixed on Catherine's profile. Her face was frighteningly calm, as if the words she had just spoken were not bombs, but merely today's menu. This was not the Catherine he knew. The Catherine he knew was gentle, patient, understanding. She brought him warm milk when he worked late. She sat silently beside him when he was in a bad mood. She smiled and forgave when Brooke hurt her. The woman before him was as hard as steel and as precise as a scalpel. He suddenly realized, perhaps he had never known Catherine at all. Perhaps the submissive, all-forgiving Catherine, who had yielded to him in everything for 3 years, was just one of her facets, one she chose to show him. And now, she no longer chose to be gentle. The chaos in the hall lasted for about 20 minutes. Brooke was eventually led off the stage by her assistants. They said that as she was coming down, her legs gave out, and she was practically carried out. Julian disappeared in the turmoil. He quickly left the hall through the VIP exit, casting one last look at Catherine. There was too much in that look. Anger, shock, regret, and something else, very faint, that he himself did not want to admit. Fear. He was afraid. Catherine felt that look but didn't turn around. She finished her water, and as she did, Alexander stood up and draped his jacket over her shoulders. Her back was covered in a thin layer of sweat, and she could have caught a cold in the chilly air conditioning. They exited the ballroom through a side door. The moment they stepped out, the night air blew over them, ruffling a strand of hair at Catherine's temple. She took a deep breath of the cold night air, and the string that had been pulled taut in her chest all evening finally loosened a little. "Are you okay?" Alexander asked quietly. "I'm fine. My hands are shaking." Catherine looked down and saw that her right hand was indeed trembling slightly. It was a normal reaction after the adrenaline wore off. Alexander said nothing. He just naturally reached out and gently took her trembling right hand in his. His palm was warm, like a sun-heated stone. Catherine's fingers twitched in his palm, then slowly calmed down. She didn't pull her hand away. They walked side by side like that through the parking lot of the Plaza Hotel. The moon, half hidden by clouds, cast a cold light. "The day after tomorrow," Catherine said suddenly, "we'll meet in court." Alexander turned his head and looked at her. The moonlight fell on his profile, sharp and handsome. "Okay," he said. His hand holding hers tightened slightly. The day after the charity event, the internet exploded. Catherine didn't look at her phone. She sat by the window in her rented apartment, playing the cello. The sun was shining outside, filtering through the curtains, drawing squares of light on the floor. The sound of the cello filled the small room, low, sustained, with an imperturbable strength. But the outside world had turned upside down. The video from that evening at the Plaza Hotel had garnered over 200 million views in 48 hours. On all platforms, topics about Brooke Hayes' plagiarism completely dominated the trending lists. Hashtags hung in the top 10. Number Catherine exposes Brooke. Number Sterling Holdings implicated in manipulation. Number Brooke's 3 years of fame a fraud. Number Scandal at the Virtuoso Prize. The comments had radically changed. Users who, a fortnight ago, had accused Catherine of immorality were now filled with righteous anger. Damn, so Brooke is the real thief, and Catherine is the rightful owner. Sterling Holdings paid $5 million for a final number for a plagiarist. Capitalists are just disgusting. Catherine is so cool. If I were her, I would have clawed that hypocrite's face right on stage. I feel so bad for Catherine. She prepared for 8 months for a performance, and it was stolen, and then she was bullied online. How devastating that must have been. In the wave of public outrage, Sterling Holdings' PR team issued a statement. The wording was vague, avoiding the substance of the matter. It mostly said that the incident is under investigation and Sterling Holdings reserves the right to take legal action for any false accusations. But this statement was ridiculed by users and trended under a new hashtag. Number Sterling statement avoids the point. Number Is Julian Sterling covering for Brooke Hayes? Julian Sterling himself did not appear in public. His social media accounts were silent. His assistant told everyone that Mr. Sterling is on a business trip, but insiders reported that after that evening, Julian had smashed all the decorative paintings on the wall in his office at the headquarters and then drank a whole bottle of whiskey alone. And Brooke Hayes. That night, she was taken to the Sterling's country house. They said her mental state was extremely unstable. She paced her room all night, pulling at her hair and muttering, "It's not my fault, and Julian won't abandon me." Catherine knew none of this and wasn't interested. She was only concerned with one thing: the court. The public exposé at the plaza was just the first step. The real deadly blow had to be struck within the framework of the law. Catherine needed not the court of public opinion, but a court of law. Because only a court's decision could definitively establish Brooke's guilt, leaving her no room for excuses, and preventing Julian's capital from ever whitewashing her reputation. Mr. Stevens's legal team filed an official lawsuit in court within 48 hours of the incident. Plaintiff: Catherine Reed. Defendant: Brooke Hayes. Charges: copyright infringement, commercial espionage, defamation. Simultaneously, an international legal team organized by Alexander sent a formal request to the organizing committee of the American Virtuoso Prize, demanding the annulment of all of Brooke Hayes' awards related to this work, and holding the committee accountable for possibly accepting bribes in changing the program. On the third day, the court officially accepted the case. The hearing date was set for 11 days later. During those 11 days, Julian finally broke. Catherine received a message from him on the second day after the lawsuit was accepted, late at night. Not a text, but a long email from his personal, not corporate, email address. The letter was long, the tone authoritative, characteristic of Julian. Catherine, I know you're angry. I admit I didn't handle that evening quite right. But what you've escalated this to now will not benefit you, me, or Sterling Holdings. I can make Brooke publicly apologize. I can restore your glory at the American Virtuoso Prize. I can arrange your return to the stage, but on one condition: you must withdraw the lawsuit. Think carefully. If this really goes to court, do you think Sterling Holdings lawyers will leave you alone? Will your so-called evidence withstand cross-examination? Was the way you obtained the camera footage completely legal? Can you withstand years of legal fees? I don't want it to come to this. Come back, let's talk. If you agree to sit at the negotiating table, everything can be discussed. At the end of the letter was an added sentence: you are my wife. Whatever happens, that fact will not change. Catherine finished reading the letter and closed her laptop. She didn't reply, didn't get angry, didn't even smirk. She just stood up, went to her case, took out her cello, and began to play the third series of etudes for the day. The bow moved confidently over the strings in the lower register, producing deep, decisive sounds. Every sound was precise, everyone measured. Catherine answered Julian with music. Your words are not worth my time. On the day of the court hearing, Catherine wore a black and gold pantsuit, a sharp shoulder line, a tailored waist, trousers without a single crease. Her hair was pulled back into a neat low ponytail, and in her ears were small gold hoop earrings, a gift from her grandfather for her 18th birthday. Journalists crowded the courthouse. Catherine got out of the car to a barrage of camera flashes. With an impassive face, she walked past the reporters, followed by her lawyer, Mr. Stevens, and a team of 3 top lawyers provided by Alexander. At the entrance to the courtroom, she saw another group from a distance. Brooke Hayes was being led by 2 bodyguards. Her face was ashen, she had lost a lot of weight, her eyes were sunken. She looked like a withered leaf. But she was still wearing white, always in white, as if she would die without it. A few steps behind her walked Julian in dark glasses, in a business suit, with a stone-faced expression. The 2 groups crossed paths at the entrance to the hall. The air froze. Brooke looked up and met Catherine's gaze. Her lips moved, as if she wanted to say something, but Catherine's gaze merely slid over her face. It was a silent, "You're not worth my attention." And Catherine entered the courtroom. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Brooke's lawyers tried to challenge the legality of obtaining the camera footage, citing that Catherine had used her right to access information about joint marital property. But Stevens was ready. He presented the court with a preservation of evidence order issued by the court even before the lawsuit was accepted, as well as a data integrity certificate from SaferTech. Brooke's lawyers also tried to challenge the authenticity of the draft, claiming it could have been forged. But Catherine's legal team called an expert from a reputable international graphology agency to testify. Using radiocarbon dating of the paper's age and an analysis of the ink's oxidation, the expert irrefutably proved that the draft was created at least 3.5 years ago. Every line of defense was breached, every attempt to wriggle out crushed. Brooke sat on the defendant's bench, at first trying to remain calm, then starting to bite her nails, shake her leg, and constantly drink water. And when the large screen in the courtroom showed that very video of Brooke in her pajamas, stealthily opening the door to Catherine's study, using a key to open a desk drawer, rummaging in it for nearly 10 minutes, and then hiding the dark blue folder under her pajamas and quickly leaving, Brooke, on the defendant's bench, suddenly let out a piercing scream. The sound was like metal scraping on glass, shrill, desperate, full of the horror of having all masks torn away. She curled into a ball, clutching her head, her nails digging into her scalp. "It's not me! It's not me! That video is a fake! Julian! Julian, say something! Tell them it's not me!" Brooke hysterically screamed towards Julian, who was sitting in the gallery. Julian sat in the front row of the public seating, his glasses long since removed, revealing bloodshot eyes. His jaw was clenched like stone. He didn't say a word. What could he say? The evidence was irrefutable. If he defended Brooke, it would be tantamount to publicly protecting a criminal in a courtroom. The head of Sterling Holdings' legal department had told him an hour before the hearing that there was no chance of winning this case. The only way to minimize the damage was to cut her loose, to cut Brooke loose. Julian clenched his fist so hard his knuckles cracked. The judge called for a 15-minute recess. During the recess, Catherine left the courtroom and stood at the end of the corridor. Alexander quietly appeared beside her. In his hand was a glass of warm lemon water. The perfect temperature, not scalding. Catherine took a sip, leaning against the wall. "You held up better in court than I expected. Alexander said quietly, with a hint of restrained admiration. That's thanks to Stevens. And to you, Alexander turned to her. The logic of structuring the evidence that was largely your contribution. Catherine didn't deny it. She looked at the glass in her hands. After the verdict is read, she said suddenly, Julian will most likely stop me in the hallway. I know he'll have a lot to say. What are you going to do? Catherine looked up and met Alexander's gaze. I'm going to hand him the divorce agreement to his face. Alexander was silent for a moment, then nodded. Good. Do you need me to be there? No. The corners of Catherine's lips curved into something resembling a smile. This is the last piece of business between us. I have to finish it myself. Alexander said nothing more. He just reached out, his thumb gently brushing a sweat-stuck strand of hair from her forehead. The movement was as light as the wind. Catherine's eyelashes fluttered, but she didn't pull away. 15 minutes later, the hearing resumed. The judge read the verdict. The defendant, Brooke Hayes, is found guilty of infringing on the copyrights of the plaintiff, Catherine Reed. The defendant is ordered to immediately cease all infringements, issue a public apology, and pay compensation for economic and moral damages in the amount of $4,200,000. Furthermore, the court has determined that the defendant's actions contain elements of commercial espionage and is referring the case to law enforcement for further criminal investigation. The judge's gavel struck. Brooke collapsed onto the bench like a rag doll. Her lawyer was saying something to her, but she didn't react. Her eyes were fixed on one point, her pupils dilated, her lips moving but making no sound. When the bailiffs approached, Brooke finally snapped out of it. She jerked her head up, her body convulsing. No! I don't want to go to jail. Julian! Julian, save me! You promised! You said you would protect me my whole life! Her screams echoed through the courtroom. The bailiffs took her by the arms and led her to the exit. She resisted desperately, being practically dragged. Julian stood in the courtroom and watched this scene motionlessly. His face was no longer just grim. It was ashen, devastated, as if his soul had been sucked out. Brooke's screams faded in the corridor. Silence fell in the courtroom. Catherine gathered her documents and stood up. She didn't look at Julian. She walked out of the courtroom, her stride even and calm. Journalists were waiting for her in the hallway. She walked around them, avoiding the microphones and cameras, and headed for a side exit. At a turn in the corridor, hurried footsteps sounded behind her. She knew who it was. Catherine! Julian's voice was hoarse, like a cello string scraped with sandpaper. Catherine stopped but didn't turn around. Julian came up behind her and stopped 2 steps away, breathing heavily. His voice was quiet, but there was a tremor in it. Are you happy? Catherine slowly turned. Julian's appearance surprised her a little. Not with pity, but with a sudden sense of detachment. This man's eyes were red, like a rabbit's, with dark shadows underneath, and a gray stubble on his chin. He hadn't shaved in at least 2 days. His shirt collar was unbuttoned, his tie askew. His whole appearance spoke of an unprecedented decay and confusion. Julian, the ever-perfect, ever-controlling, ever-arrogant man, now stood before her like a building after an earthquake, still standing on the outside, but with all internal structures collapsed. Catherine, he called her name again, and in his voice was something Catherine had never heard before, almost a plea. I was wrong. I didn't know Brooke had done that. I swear, I didn't know. Whether you knew or not, it has nothing to do with me anymore, Catherine interrupted. No, listen to me. I can cut all ties with her. Right now, I'll give you anything you want. The final number, the first chair in the orchestra, international tours. Tell me what you want. Catherine looked into his eyes. 3 years. For 3 years, she had searched those eyes for love, respect, even a drop of care. She found nothing. Now she wasn't looking. And in those eyes, fear, regret, and annoyance finally appeared. Everything appeared. But it was too late. Julian, Catherine took a document from her folder and handed it to him. The divorce agreement. Sign it. Julian's gaze fell on the document, his pupils narrowing. Impossible. His voice suddenly became hollow. The weariness and pleading instantly gave way to something else, the innate thirst for control making one last desperate attempt to hold on. I won't sign it. Catherine, you're my wife. Do you think by winning one lawsuit you can just walk away from me? I don't think so. Catherine's voice was as calm as a winter lake. You just can't hold me anymore. She placed the agreement in his numb fingers. You have 3 days to think about it. If I don't receive the signed document in 3 days, I will file for divorce in court. And with the lawsuit, I will present evidence of Sterling Holdings' interference with the American Virtuoso Prize jury's decisions. Julian's body froze. Interference with the jury's decisions. He had indeed done it. The $5 million, the last-minute cancellation of Catherine's final number, the deleted camera footage. It was all his doing. He thought he had been discreet enough. But Catherine knew. She knew everything. You. Julian's Adam's apple bobbed sharply. His voice became hoarse and cracked. When did you start investigating this? Catherine looked at him and suddenly felt tired. Not physically, but spiritually. Tired of dealing with a man who stubbornly refused to admit his crimes. From the very day you first asked me to yield to Brooke. With that, she turned and walked away. This time, she didn't stop. Behind her, there was a dull thud, as if something had hit the wall, and then, a heavy, stifled breath. Catherine walked out through the side door of the courthouse. The sun was bright. She squinted and put on her dark glasses. Alexander's car was parked 10 meters from the exit. The black body looked understated and solid. He was waiting for her, leaning against the car. Seeing her, he approached and opened the back door for her. Catherine got into the car. When the door closed, all the sounds were left outside. Silence. Such silence. Catherine leaned back on the leather seat and closed her eyes. She was just enjoying this long-awaited silence. Without Julian's reproaches, without Brooke's screams, without camera flashes, without microphones. Just the light woody scent in the car's interior, and the quiet rustle of papers as Alexander, in the front seat, reviewed documents. The car smoothly merged into the city traffic. Catherine mentally listed, first, Brooke is defeated. Second, Julian's capitalist blockade is broken. Third, the divorce agreement is delivered. One last thing remained. To return to the stage, not to prove something to someone, not for revenge, not for fame, but because her cello was waiting for her. The cello that had waited for her for 20 years and had never betrayed her. Catherine mentally touched the outlines of her instrument. And then, she truly fell asleep. The city rushed by outside the window. The glass facades of the skyscrapers reflected the dazzling sun. Everything was moving forward. And Catherine could finally close her eyes in peace, without fear of a knife in the back. On the third day, Julian signed the divorce agreement. When Mr. Stevens brought Catherine the signed document, she was rehearsing in her studio. She put down her bow, took the document, and flipped to the last page. Julian's signature was sloppy and forceful, the ink at the end smudged, as if his hand had been trembling. Catherine looked at it for 3 seconds, then put the document in a folder and picked up her bow again. Thus ended a 3-year marriage. On an ordinary Tuesday, without ceremony, without tears, without any memorable moments. As if it was meant to be. That same week, once all the divorce papers were finalized, the organizing committee of the International Masters competition in Vienna sent Catherine an official invitation to participate in the North American qualifying round. It was one of the most prestigious competitions in the world of classical music, held every 3 years. In their region, no more than 5 cellists were granted the right to participate. 3 years ago, Catherine was supposed to participate in the previous competition. She was at the peak of her form then, and everyone in the industry was sure she would win. But that year, she married Julian. Julian had said, "A competition is too exhausting. Your health is fragile. Rest at home. You can go next time. It's not too late." She believed him. Now, the next time had come. The evening Catherine received the invitation, she rehearsed in her studio until 3 in the morning. New calluses formed on her fingers. The calluses burst, blood mixed with the rosin on the strings. It was sticky and painful. She didn't stop. Over and over, 17 times, she played the same piece until every note was almost maniacally precise. At 3:30 in the morning, there was a quiet knock on the studio door. Catherine looked up. Alexander was standing in the doorway. In his hands was a thermos. He was wearing a dark gray cashmere coat, obviously just from some late-night meeting. There were faint shadows of fatigue under his eyes, but when he saw Catherine, his eyes lit up. "It's 3 o'clock," he said. "I know you have blood on your fingers." Catherine looked at her fingers. There was indeed a fresh cut on the pad, blood seeping from it. "It's nothing, just a scratch." Alexander said nothing. He walked in, placed the thermos on the table, and then knelt before her. He took a small first aid kit from his pocket, one he always carried, opened it, and took out iodine and a bandage. Then, very naturally, he took her right hand and gently uncurled her fingers. His movements were very light, as if he were handling fragile porcelain. When the iodine touched the cut, The tips of Catherine's fingers twitched. Alexander's other hand immediately covered her palm, his thumb lightly pressing on the back. The pressure was just enough to soothe, but not to restrain. "Just bear with it," he said quietly. Catherine looked at his lowered eyelashes, at his long fingers carefully applying the bandage. She watched as, after finishing, he didn't immediately let go of her hand, but warmed it in his own, as if protecting a flame. Her eyes suddenly stung. Not from the wound, but because it had been so long since anyone had treated her this way. Julian would never have done this. He would have just frowned and said reproachfully, "How could you be so careless?" "There's porridge in the thermos." Alexander let go of her hand, stood up, and took a step back. "Eat, then you can continue. Did you bring porridge specifically for me?" "It was on the way." Catherine looked at him. The studio was in the suburbs, the Blackwell Tower in the city center. At 3 a.m, from the center to the suburbs, how was that on the way? But she didn't expose him. She just took the thermos, opened it. Hot artisanal chicken noodle soup. The perfect temperature, not scalding. Savory and comforting. Catherine ate a spoonful. The warm liquid warmed her from the inside. "It's delicious," she said. The corners of Alexander's lips twitched slightly. "That's good." He didn't stay long. He brought the porridge, treated her wound, and went to the exit. At the door, he stopped and, without turning, said, "The qualifying round. The venue, the judges, the logistics, I've already handled all the external issues. Julian will have no chance to interfere." Catherine squeezed her spoon. "You only need to do one thing." Alexander's voice came from behind the door, low and confident. "Go on stage. Play. Be yourself." And he left. The tails of his coat disappeared into the night. Catherine sat there, holding the bowl of porridge, listening to his footsteps recede, the car door close, the engine start, and then everything was quiet again. She looked at the soup. The vegetables were perfectly diced, the chicken cooked until tender. You couldn't buy this kind of soup in a store. Someone had made it by hand. Does Alexander know how to cook? Or did he ask someone to make it and bring it? Whatever the answer, a wave of inexplicable warmth rose in Catherine's chest. She finished the porridge to the last spoonful. Then she picked up her bow again and continued to play. This time, it wasn't the competition piece, but a new composition. The one she had been writing down note by note these past few days. It didn't have a name yet, but in every note was what she wanted to say but hadn't said yet. The qualifying round took place 3 weeks later. The venue was the city's largest concert hall, Phoenix Hall. 3,000 seats, sold out in 48 hours. The moment Catherine's name appeared on the list of participants, the entire classical music world was buzzing. Everyone was waiting to see if this woman, who had been hounded by Sterling's capital for almost 2 months, could still play. Did she still have that level? Was she worthy of standing on this stage? On the day of the qualifying round, a long line formed outside Phoenix Hall. Tickets from scalpers were selling for 15 times their face value. Catherine changed backstage into a concert dress, black velvet, no jewelry, minimalist to the extreme. She sat in her dressing room, her eyes closed, evening her breath. There was a knock on the door. "Miss Reed, you're on third. 15 minutes left." "Understood." Catherine opened her eyes and looked at herself in the mirror. She had lost weight. 2 months of intense training, plus all the previous ordeals, had made her cheekbones more pronounced, her chin sharper. But her eyes shone brighter than ever, like 2 stars tempered by the night. She stood up, took her cello, and walked out of the dressing room. At the end of the corridor, she saw a person. Alexander. He was in a black business suit, leaning against the wall. Seeing her, he straightened up and took 2 steps toward her. They stood facing each other in the middle of the corridor. Alexander looked at her with a warm, confident, boundless gaze, as if he were looking at the most precious thing in the world. He didn't say good luck, he didn't say don't worry, he didn't offer any cheap encouragements. He just reached out and very lightly touched the back of her hand, the one holding the bow. The warmth of his fingers transferred through the skin, short and distinct. "I'll be in the audience," he said. The corners of Catherine's lips curved into a faint but genuine smile. And she turned and walked onto the stage. When the lights came up, 3,000 pairs of eyes were on her. Catherine walked to the chair in the center of the stage, confidently placed the cello between her knees. The metal end pin dug into the floor with a soft click. She raised her bow. The hall fell silent. The first note sounded, low, sustained, like an underground river breaking free from the depths of the earth. In the silence of the 3,000-seat hall, that note slowly spread, filling every corner. Then the second, the third, the fourth. The melody unfolded like a tide, from a quiet whisper to a roaring current. Every stroke of the bow was as precise as a scalpel, every vibrato so subtle it sent shivers down the spine. Someone in the audience began to cry, not from sadness, but from that pure, unadulterated beauty that can break through any defense. Catherine played with her eyes closed. In her world, there were only the vibration of the strings, the friction of the bow, and the sound pouring from the depths of her soul. This piece, which she had prepared for the qualifying round, was Bach's Cello Suite No. 6. Considered one of the most difficult pieces for the cello, it tests the performer's skill and spiritual depth. Catherine played for 14 minutes. When the final note sounded, her bow froze on the strings. And then silence. 3 seconds of silence. And immediately thunderous applause. Like a tsunami, it exploded from 3,000 seats. Someone stood up. 1, 2, 10, 100. Eventually, the entire hall was on its feet. The standing ovation lasted for 4 minutes. When Catherine stood up to bow, her gaze, through the shimmering light, found in the audience, in the third row, in the very center, that one person. Alexander sat there. He didn't stand up. Not because he couldn't, but because his hands were trembling slightly. This tremor was not from fear. It was an instinctive reaction to a strong emotional shock. His eyes shone like a scattering of stars. Catherine, on stage, smiled at him. Lightly, barely noticeably, but only for him. The results of the qualifying round were announced at 11 that night. Catherine took first place in total points, unanimously passing the selection. She had won the sole spot from the region to participate in the International Masters competition in Vienna. When the results were announced, Catherine was in the dressing room at Phoenix Hall, removing her makeup. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages poured in like an avalanche. Congratulations, interview requests, contract offers. Those who had previously smeared her were now fawning over her. She didn't reply to a single one. She replied to only one message. She sent it to Alexander. Thank you for being in the audience. The reply came in 3 seconds. I always will be. Catherine stared at those 4 words for a long time. Then she smiled and put her phone in her pocket. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, in some rented apartment, Julian sat in the dark. On his laptop screen was a broadcast of the qualifying round. Catherine's figure on the screen was radiant. The applause from the cheap computer speakers sounded distorted and noisy. His eyes were red. On the coffee table lay a copy of the signed divorce agreement and 3 debt collection letters from the bank. After that court case, the stock of Sterling Holdings had fallen by 37%. Many partners had terminated their contracts. Banks had tightened their lending conditions. Friends from the business world had one by one deleted him from their contacts. The apartment he now lived in cost $3,000 a month. It was the most he could afford. On the screen, Catherine bowed, the black hem of her dress flowing in the spotlight. Julian looked at that face. The face he had seen every morning for 3 years. The face in an apron as she made breakfast. The sleepy face as she waited for him to come home late at night. The face that, after all his offenses, still smiled gently and said, "It's okay." Now that face shone on a stage before thousands of people. Next to her stood a man he could never compare to, and he sat in a $3,000 rented apartment, looking at debt collection letters, unable to afford even a decent bottle of wine. Julian slammed the laptop shut. The darkness swallowed him again. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking violently, silently. But this silent breakdown was more terrifying than any scream. 3 months later, the Golden Hall of the Vienna Musikverein. Catherine stood before a mirror backstage. She was wearing a dark green velvet dress. The hem, trailing on the floor, resembled a dark lake as she moved. Today was her solo concert. Not a qualifying round, not a competition. A concert that belonged only to her. The Golden Hall of the Vienna Musikverein. A solo concert for a cellist. In the last 30 years, this had happened only 4 times. She was the 5th. And the youngest. There was a knock on the dressing room door. Catherine turned. Alexander was standing in the doorway. Today he was in a black tailcoat, so formal he looked as if he were going to his own wedding. The bow tie was hand-tied, and in his buttonhole was a simple platinum pin in the shape of a musical note. He looked at Catherine in the mirror, and the tenderness he had held back for so long finally showed completely. "Ready?" "Ready." Alexander approached and took something from the inner pocket of his jacket. A small velvet box. Not a ring. Catherine opened it. Inside lay a brooch, a gold base, inlaid with a tiny obsidian in the shape of a cello. It's custom-made, Alexander said. Obsidian wards off evil. Pin it here when you go on stage, he pointed to her chest. Catherine looked at the small brooch. When her fingers touched the metal base, it was warm. Alexander had warmed it in his hands. She didn't say thank you. She just looked up at him, then handed him the brooch. Pin it for me. Alexander took the brooch. His fingers, touching the fabric on her chest, were extremely careful not to prick her. After pinning it, he took a step back to admire it. Done. Catherine looked down. The obsidian cello lay quietly on her chest, like a small but reliable protector. She smiled. I'm going. Yes, I'm in the front row. Catherine, lifting her hem, walked out of the dressing room. At the end of the corridor, she turned back. Alexander was still standing there, his gaze following her. She smiled at him and turned toward the stage. When she sat in the center of the Golden Hall's stage, all 1,600 seats were filled. The light from the crystal chandeliers fell on her hair, her shoulders, and the cello that had been with her for 20 years. Catherine took a deep breath. The air held the warm scent of the wooden floor, a light fragrance of the audience's perfume, and the bitter, resinous smell of rosin. This was her stage, not given by Julian, not gifted by someone else, not earned through humiliation. She herself, stroke by stroke, with drops of blood and sweat, had achieved it. She raised her bow. The final piece of the evening was her own new composition. When the first note sounded, she gave it a name: Solitary Road. The sound of the cello soared under the arches of the Golden Hall, rising, spreading like a river that, having passed through mountains and valleys, finally flows into the boundless sea. In the front row, Alexander slightly closed his eyes. He understood every note. These were the words Catherine wanted to say to him. Not gratitude, not dependence. But how one independent soul chooses to walk beside another independent soul. The piece ended. The entire hall stood up. The applause, like a golden rain, poured down in an endless stream. Catherine stood up to bow. Raising her head, her gaze, through the multitude of faces, found in the front row those very eyes. Alexander was looking at her. The corners of his lips were slightly raised, and there was a light in his eyes. This light was not the light of possession, not the light of control, not a declaration of "you are mine." It was a pure, equal gaze that said, "You are beautiful. You deserve all of this." Catherine, under the applause, slightly raised her chin. Her lips moved silently. She said, "I have arrived." Alexander, looking at her, answered just as silently, "I know." The vaults of the Golden Hall shone in the lights. The applause did not cease, and Catherine stood in this golden radiance, like a blade that had passed through 1,000 trials and was finally forged. Shining, cold, independent. She no longer needed anyone to define who she was. She was Catherine Reed, and that was enough.